Hey, Sean.
Hey, Lindsay, how are you?
Pretty good. So thanks for joining on this. Well, I don't know if it's a lovely day. It's snowing here in Pennsylvania. It's probably cold.
Nice. It is cloudy here in Kansas City, cloudy and cold. Hopefully the groundhog does not see his shadow tomorrow.
I heard that all the meteorologists are saying he will because it's
Ah,
been wild. I don't know. Not happy about that, but so here we are today at the end of our January Project Health Viz, as it is February 1st. And the first data set of 2021 was the NHS admissions by specialty, which is a UK-based large healthcare facility. And we had our little challenge of a C-suite dashboard. And so I think everybody submitted something that I would consider fitting into that category. So we're going to do a little discussion about kind of C-suite dashboards and how, what are some best practices? What best practices did we see? What kind of cool tips and tricks might we have seen in some of these dashboards? So yeah, and I think we're going to start with talking about ours first, just kind of how we approach this particular data set as well as the challenge topic. And I am going to quickly, before we get to that, just flash through all the submissions because I want to make sure we see them all and kind of get a sense from the beginning, like what C-suite dashboards kind of have looked like and some of the variety. So obviously we have yours, Sean, and mine. We've got a nice one by Alice McKnight, Dennis Cow, Eric Balash. We have Pradeep, Jared Flores, Hanane Ouhammouch. We have Quintin and Robin King, who did a story points kind of one. So this is just one of the pages, but there were a number of pages in hers.
So this is the one that I built, and this, so one of the things that we wanted to kind of talk about with corporate C-suite dashboards is it's really good to have a nice structure to your dashboard. So this structure is actually the template that I use at Cerner. KPIs up at the top, and then everything else down below is kind of correlated, connected to those KPIs. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to touch on four main things with my corporate dashboard. KPIs, doing some level of next level drill. So we don't want to give you don't want to give your C-suite too much, because then they'll just spend their time going way too deep in the weeds, which is they have entire teams of people to do that. So give them just what they need, and then so that's why you don't see a lot of filters, very little interactivity, very intentional interactivity though. So if you see when you hover on these, you're going to see the different specialties highlight throughout. So you're still able to see that kind of, okay, if I want to go see where these other specialties are in this dashboard, you can kind of see where to kind of go get that.
Right.
And then lastly, I just wanted to make mine consumable. So at Cerner right now, we do range dashboards where we set a minimum and no maximum, because we have, our dashboards are viewed at everywhere from desktop to laptops, all the way up to presenting on the board, in the boardroom. So making sure that scales appropriately to screen size is something that's also very important. So
that's interesting. Yeah, I actually never really used range. A lot of I guess it makes sense in like some larger organizations where, like you said, they're used in different platforms, a presentation, even mobile or what have you. A lot of the clients I work with are just using it on, their server on a desktop. So they end up requesting a particular fixed size that they end to want, or if it's embedded into like some other kind of web page or some other platform, that then they have some kind of limitation, So that's interesting. Good things to consider for, who's consuming your dashboard, right? And if they are going to need different sizes of things, to be considerate of that. Yeah, awesome. I mean, so one of the things I think we're going to talk about a little bit is, that hierarchy I think is really important, starting with those big numbers and then some high level summary. So and then lower level details. And often when we think about C-suite dashboards, we also think about like drill down reports. So we start with one main kind of landing page that basically it's like if someone has less than 5 minutes, they can get all the information that they want, or may need to make some type of decision, or, have some big takeaway. And then often needing some level of drill down reports, but those are an extra click, right? Like you need to get to those because we don't want people to be overwhelmed on this first page as an executive. You want just like kind of the bare minimum so that they can, get their answers or what have you. So I'll share a little bit about mine now. I intentionally took a little bit of different kind of approach in terms of just the design. However, I mean, more particularly in the colors and kind of the background, but the concept of what is important for a C-suite, I maintained. So you'll see that even though I have like this wooden desk background and this like floating image with some, pretty side panel, the actual components are essentially the same as yours in what you indicated. So I started out with the KPIs. So here, there it goes, reloading. On the left-hand side, I was considering that the first page that an executive would come to would be a KPI page that would have just some high-level metrics. So I have their admissions, then we have the 4 different types of admissions: emergency, waiting department, plan, and other. And then within them, what I did is I put in just the top 5 specialties. So if someone wanted to say, hey, like 37% of our admissions are emergency admissions, where do I want to look at next? Just giving them that top layer, those 5, like this data set had a ton of specialties. And in my opinion, you don't want to give somebody all of them. It's a little overwhelming to have like 40 or whatever it was specialties to try to weed through.
Yeah.
So I was intentionally thinking like, this gives you that summary, that top level. And in fact, I even only, in terms of a minimalist view, I only labeled the top 1, which means, yes, you don't know what the exact values are for the other 4, but that was very intentional to say, hey, look, you get some perspective, the number, you can kind of look and say, hey, that's like probably 2/3, maybe, it's less than half, but I wanted you just to get kind of that visual instead of all the details. And then as you mentioned, which I think is important, is minimal filtering. So this makes it easy. You just get to see something. But down here, this is the only area where I have a filter, which is, and it's a simple one, here's admissions. And so maybe I do want to look at emergency a little further for those top 5. And now I can get those actual numbers. And then I can click on one of these and have the details for that. So you click on a different one would be helpful over here.
Yeah.
And so that's it. Like there's not any drop down filters because it's really easy for someone to get overwhelmed with multiple, like if you have like 5 different filters. So just a quick select, move on. And the last thing that I think is important is for executives is always having a compared to what. So I often at work do a lot of like reference lines and either compared to a prior year, or in this case, I did the reference line is compared to the total. So just seeing what the average is for the specific specialty and then the total. So are you above or below that, general average? And that's always helpful too. So you can really make comparisons, because otherwise the number doesn't mean a whole lot. And for an executive, you got to say, like, how does this compare to our overall productivity, our overall length of stay, our overall X, Y, or Z? And so that's how they make decisions. So I think those are also important things for executive dashboards.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I make a ton of bullet charts at work.
Yeah.
So
exactly. I think they're very useful.
Providers love to compare themselves. So
yeah, totally. Which is also really good in healthcare for improving quality is when there's a little friendly competition. They like to see, how they do to other facilities, other hospitals. I know I worked with some quality management for hospitals, and once they moved beyond the, keeping everything hidden, everyone appreciated the unblinded, like, how do I compare to that hospital, like down the road? And, let's kind of think through some of those key topics, I guess, as we look through some of these others and kind of think about like what really works with and why these elements work, right? Mm-hmm. This one's Alice McKnight's again.
Yeah, I like it. I like how again, it's very, very monochrome, very one color. There's not a lot of flair going on. Again, minimal interactivity, and it's just kind of it's just a really nice way to kind of show exactly what's most important, but still allow for kind of different discovery in there as well. So yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I think, one of the things about utilizing the big numbers that, I think is really important is making sure that there's not too much. So too many, like here we've reduced it to 17.2 million instead of like all the numbers, which technically I had like all the numbers, but this is a really great way to make it quick to remember, right? Like I can just do 6.5 million, about 6 million, right? Like I have a quick sense versus all the other digits. So I tend to tell people like that's very helpful for big numbers when you can, to make them just really quick and easy to understand. And also she did kind of like what we were talking about earlier with, just having a couple quick little, these are probably parameter actions that are switching out the view. And that is really easy for an executive, just quickly identify what they want instead of a drop down and just select. So Eric's, I'm actually gonna go to the beginning of his, just so we can talk about this quick landing page. It's kind of a clever little thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Eric
Yeah,
is really kind of landing page with an enter. But if we read it, it talks about, the PHI. And so I thought that was pretty clever because, I'm sure you work with this, probably even more so than I, but, row level security is something that I run across a lot working in healthcare, and obviously having the right people access the right dashboard, being able to access the dashboard or not and see the data is, something we run across a lot.
A lot, yes.
So while this is just a concept, it's a really neat way to think about, having some sort of front landing page for, hey, yes, you're allowed to view this information. So it was pretty clever on Eric's part. You want to have executives be able to quickly get their information and essentially not be distracted, by a lot of other things. They don't have a lot of time. We don't want to waste their time. So there's two things on Eric's that I want to point out. And one is the use of color. So this is kind of the first one where I've seen that we looked at so far with an intentional, this blue, this teal color that's pointing out kind of like the highest value, obviously drawing my attention. So I'm very clearly seeing those bars. And that's really useful for, any dashboard, but for an executive to just be like, hey, quick look here. If you literally only have 1 second, you're going to look at this bar. If you have, a couple more minutes, maybe you'll look at the rest. So I think that's a really nice.
And I really like the vertical KPIs. It's not something that you see a lot, but when it's used correctly, and in certain scenarios, I think it can look really nice. So
I totally agree.
Nice. It's a nice way to kind of organize, because in one way it's like, okay, the KPIs are good, and this is kind of where you kind of get, it's like, okay, do they care about the raw numbers or do they care about the detail? And that's going to depend on your stakeholder, and that's going to be a separate conversation. But so what I like about this is you can see really quickly off to the side, yep, here are my big numbers. But if I'm more detail oriented, the thing that strikes out first are the charts. The first thing that you're going to look at are the charts as opposed to the KPIs, which is, again, in the right scenario, I think it looks really nice.
Yeah, and I like his use of like that white space, like just separating all these things, so you can really kind of focus on each one. And this kind of like grid layout where we have, and he's kind of got this, more vertical, where we have a column here, we have a column here. Essentially, we have, a top one and then a column and a column. So there's a lot of these vertical oriented grid, which is exceptionally useful, I think, in executive dashboards where things are kind of grouped together. So we know now we're reading kind of left to right in his versus perhaps top down to start. Like I'm not going to read total episodes and age band. Like ideally you're looking at these and then over here.
Right.
And I think his left side panel really like sets that off, because I'm already now oriented to this vertical kind of column based view, which is really great. And the other thing I was going to mention is, so he has these really nice buttons that expand the information. And, you know, what I'll say is it does add clicks to your user to have to, you know, click to see these things versus just having it open. But one of the things that I think kind of helps is it's not distracted. Like, I'm not distracted by looking here first. If I'm going to this page, I'm immediately here and then realizing, okay, if I want to look at something else, I can, versus coming to this page and reading all this first because it's dark. I'm drawn to it. It's on the leftmost side. You know, it's in that key area. So I'm gonna guess that there was some intention to kind of have this sort of muted out on default, which I think is kind of a really great thing to consider when building an executive dashboard. So the Yerramsetti, and we were just saying kind of earlier, this is one of the only long form ones.
This is kind of where you kind of have to think about what does your stakeholder want.
Right.
This is one where he does list every single specialty, and so perhaps it could be a little bit confusing for your stakeholder depending on their needs. But if that's a decision that was made, then, you know, by all means. But I think what really works about this is that it's not just a bar chart, right? We're actually showing different something that can actually have some insight into it, so you can kind of see your male female kind of breakdown,
right,
for that. So as opposed to just being a descending bar chart by total admissions, we're actually kind of showing the kind of distribution and the spread across all of the different specialties. So I think it works nice.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would consider adding that helps add value for an executive is at least the ability to sort. So, because I've found that, you know, people are going to come at this. So when you have this level of granularity, I either want to sort it by, you know, highest male, highest female, largest like gap between the two, like something like that, as well as alphabetical or perhaps by like group, so that I can more easily see those comparisons, because I can quickly see like where there are large differences. I mean, this sort of disconnected barbell chart, I suppose, does show me that. You know, I can see these outliers, but I would want to see them in order, or have that ability, especially if I was an executive, so I could say, well, where are there these biggest disparities or differences that I may want to understand a little better. So that'd be the only thing when you add a ton of information. And I recently had a client where we did this, where there's you know, they want to see every single, you know, category. But then in order to make it meaningful, you have to be able to sort it. I think, and that's kind of what they wanted. Otherwise, you're just scrolling through this alphabetical list, which is then tough. Yeah.
And then the only other thing that I would kind of think about is, obviously it would be a discussion, but is the unknown gender really needed? Since it is so minuscule,
right?
It's statistically insignificant. So do we even really need to have it? And because I can see how this for an executive would be very confusing, or not confusing, but very distracting to have all these green dots right there. But
agreed. Yeah, you know, as much as you want to obviously include all the data that we can, it's not going to add. Once we look at it in totality, we see that for the most part, these are very, very small numbers. And unfortunately, whenever you have something that's an unknown or an other that's uncategorized, essentially, and is a small number, you're not going to be able to draw any conclusions from it. As you said, kind of, you know, insignificant. And so, yeah, I agree that this green line is almost a little more distracting than it is helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. I'd probably remove it and then have some sort of notation that there's, like, you know, maybe even somewhere else you could hover and say, you know, this many were not, you know, this percent was unknown, or at least you have it. But yeah.
And that goes, I think that again gets back to understanding your end user. And again, there are people on the team that are going to be very interested in the number of unknowns, but probably not the C-suite folks. So again, different dashboards for different use cases. So, but but these distribution histograms over on the right or over on the left, those I think have some real value.
Yeah, these are great.
There's some really.
Yeah, I love this. And so what, what they did is they grouped these, which was really great if you think about starting up high. And obviously this left-hand side of the dashboard is like higher level, and this is the more detailed on the right. So by grouping all the different specialties, then we are able to get this distribution, which is kind of cool. So, and obviously this is real data, and thinking through it, it makes sense, right? Psychiatry, you have this peak in the 30s and then going down. Radiology, we have a peak later in life, obviously with thinking about cancers or things like that. And so it's really interesting to see how these histograms kind of skew. Here we have like this like births, probably we got age 0, pediatric types things. And so I think it's a really nice like summary visual. And these little, I don't even know what I want to call them, because so these are almost like little bands, but they're not, they're not big.
Yeah.
But we have mean age, these key KPIs, really. We have mean age, mean stay in days, and then the mean time waited, which I just thought was really clever to kind of put them in without the text and having the color. Now it's kind of, this legend's a little far from where I would start my view. I might put it up here, but still, I think it's a really great concept, and I like the idea. Maybe I'll use that sometime.
Yeah.
With someone.
I think you could, this is kind of another area where you could use interactivity. So you could have, maybe you don't show the full list of specialties, but once you click on medical specialties, then that's when all of your specialties would show up with the
like over here.
Yeah.
That's a nice idea. All right, so this is Hanane's. And so she has basically the number of admissions split out by the different types of admissions. So we've got the total, and then these four bars actually make up the total. Oops. Yep. And then we have the finished consultant episodes, which take in, these are basically like discharges, I think.
Right.
And then we kind of have, looks like some of the bands sort of on the right-hand side with some larger numbers.
Yeah. Think about how you're using your icons. If you are going to use your icons in a dashboard, just make sure that they're not too distracting, and that they, that they make sense, and watch and obviously with all your dashboards, just make sure that you're watching your colors, because it looks like the unknown episodes is the same color as the planned bar. So just kind of keep in mind those types of things.
Yeah, and so this is a place where, I would say color is not necessary. And so when I think about executives, like they're very smart people, but therefore often will then say, well, what does this color mean, right? Like if it's there, I must know, like I must be missing something. Like why is this one, why is emergency red? Does that mean bad? Why is plan green? Does that mean good? Why is this blue? Is it males? Like, so they're going to look more even deeply into something perhaps than you intend. I think anyone's going to be questioning often kind of the color intention, but we don't want an executive to be distracted and wondering, where can I find out what this means? Now, right now, it literally just means what the header is, which means we don't need the color because the header will tell me I can read it. So you just want to be careful with colors. And I agree with the icons. I tend to stay away from them in executive dashboards. If anything, they might be on a button to say, hey, like click here, or your filters are over here. But in general, they're often not needed unless they're taking the place, I think, of text for some reason. So if in this case, instead of saying male, we just had the male icon and the number, then I would say it's useful because there's no text to tell me what the number represents. And so the icon tells me. I don't think I need both.
Yep. And there is, and that kind of gets back to kind of my next point is watch the amount of text that you're putting on your executive dashboards, because we know that your executives are going to be, they're going to be, again, like Lindsay said, very, very smart. They are going to be your subject matter experts. They know what emergency means. They know what
Right.
the waiting list means. So they don't really necessarily need that face up. If you wanted to add an icon, or maybe you wanted to add a reference tab, that could certainly be helpful, and especially if you've got lower level end users using this dashboard, or who could certainly land upon this and kind of need some guidance. You can put it in a reference tab or in a hover icon or something like that. But yeah, so just something to think about as well.
So we have the two topics with admissions, and then these are the finished consultations. It looks like these little icons looks like the same information that's in the chart.
But this is good. And again, and I think one thing to kind of keep in mind is we've kind of looked at a few dashboards here. We know that executives are going to want some eye candy because they're going to be showing this off to their peers. So that you do want to give them some, but we don't want to make it too distracting, right? So try and tend to stay away from colored backgrounds, that kind of thing. Just be really intentional with your designs when it comes to C-suite level dashboards, I would say.
Right. I do like that we have this like change versus prior years. Usually folks are really interested in, like I said earlier, kind of that compared to what. And so if the compared to what is a prior year, then that's usually really helpful. Usually keeping tabs on trying to do things over time. And so if we don't have an over time chart, just having a quick, are we up or are we down, is usually what those folks want. So I think that's really useful. I do think the other thing is just that in general, not just for executives, we don't want folks to have to turn their heads to read. And so I find this a little difficult, aside from how tiny it is, which is pretty tiny. And there's plenty of space to make it a little bigger. I would make these definitely like horizontal bar charts, just so we can read these very long words.
That's right.
It would just make it a little easier, I think, on the but it's good that we've got some KPIs at the top. We've got just the kind of two charts to give that summary. I like the top 10, like I said earlier, kind of using here's a snapshot, drill down for more, if you want the full list, like go to a different report, but here's your top admissions. I think that's helpful.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. And I agree with you. Just one more thing about the color is that I think these are both just so light. They don't pop enough. So even if you had any type of background color, we want to have enough contrast. And I think the pink is just, and maybe it's because it's also a little opaque or really light, but there's just not enough contrast, at least for me visually, to kind of have those stand out as much. Okay, so Robin has the story points use. So we go through kind of having very specific dashboards. Here's just consultations, at admissions by specialty, and then broken out by like the type, whether it's emergency plan or what have you. And then we go into more details looking at a gender analysis. This is by like the time. There's a lot of filters on here.
Yep.
I guess you can even pick, okay, group. I'd probably put that first, but a group and then look. Then we have by median wait time and length of stay. Though you can't really stack those. Specialties by mean age. So we've got a lot going on here that are all kind of, and then here's the full data set.
Oh, people will love that.
Download the table. I mean, there is truth to that. Some people need their table.
That's right.
Give them the option.
That's right.
Know your end user. If they want it, you better put it in there. But
yeah, exactly. I like so I think anybody who does a story point dashboard gets kudos for doing a story points dashboard, since it is one of the probably least used features of Tableau. But I would say, something to kind of keep in mind when you're doing this, again, kind of like what we talked about earlier, just watch the amount of interactivity.
Yeah, this is probably too many clicks for a C-suite just to have to, if they want to get to a particular chart, they're all on separate pages. I tend to think about what are the key metrics someone needs to look at. And if you pick your top 3 so that you can put them all on one page, because all of these metrics, by admission type and gender, and like I say, are for each specialty, right? So you have all three, all a handful of metrics for each one. And so, pick your top three that you have to have and have them on one page, so that someone has one landing, one dashboard, literally, where they can get their information at that high level. So I think basically what she's essentially developed is something for kind of that middle management, someone lower than executive who actually needs to drill into some of these details and get that granular. Like this one, these filters are very useful. I mean, if you were, in this facility and you're in charge of either finding outliers, you're in charge of a particular, subset of specialties, and you want to look at like, well, which group has more than 50%, and I can see, which ones have a higher portion of percent of emergent admissions versus all other admissions. So some of the usefulness of the filters, is there's a practicality, but it's just probably not for an executive.
If you're the one that takes the C-suite's questions and has to go investigate, this is your dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. This is going to give you all your answers, and that is exceptionally valuable. But it takes time. There's certainly people in this role who have like an hour to be like, I got to get all these answers. My executive's got, a presentation. They want to know X, Y, and Z, and this is the dashboard's going to have everything in it. So this is Quintin's. And I know he had updated his because I think originally there's a different layout to this. And so this is one that he kind of changed around in kind of this grid format. So we have kind of like these 4 quadrants of information. So he's kind of taking like, we have all the bands kind of in one area to look at. We have some gender analysis related to finished consultations here. And then we have kind of what other folks have done, these, 2 different bar charts at the bottom with the more detail. And he does have just 2 really simple filters to help.
I was really happy to see that the folks who, I think every single person who completed a dashboard noticed quickly that the gender was related to the FCEs and not admissions. So that was a really interesting. I'm happy that people kind of made that connection, that the numbers related to gender were for the FCEs and not necessarily for the number of admissions. So nice job there.
So I like this top 5 by a selected type. So it just gives you just the top 5 for each of these types of emergency. I can see the top 5 by the percentage. And so, you and I were talking a little bit about rates and percents versus raw numbers. And I think this is a place where it's really helpful because in this data, I think general medicine is like the largest, specialty. And so they would probably be high for everything. But when you break it into a percent of total, then I can really see where are there proportional differences.
Yes.
And so, that is really helpful for executives to be able to kind of,
because that's where they have pull, right? I mean, that's where they are able to bend the needle if they need to. If general surgery and general medicine are always your top ones, then there's nothing you can do about that, right? So, but looking at proportional normalized rates are definitely something you can score some brownie points with your stakeholders if you can get that. If you can add some of that.
And so, and then the other one he's got is the top 5 and bottom 5. And so, sometimes I think this can be helpful where you can essentially see like the spread, right? We can see how high the top 5 are in comparison to the bottom 5. I mean, granted, you're missing that whole middle and what have you. And putting these 2 things next to each other, you have to have some understanding of, what you're looking at. But it does give you the spread, so you can really see if there are very large differences. For example, if I look at length of stay, which is a pretty good one. Like there's obviously huge differences here. If some of these, obviously people are not staying overnight or staying for a day, and then forensic psychology, they're there for a year, which makes sense. But you can kind of get, if you just have like the top 5 or the bottom 5, you don't have an understanding of how much that is similar or different to the rest of your data set. So while there's practicality with having just the top 5, if the bottom 5 are very close, you know, maybe the top 5, that meaning isn't as significant as here where it's like, it's really different.
Yeah.
So Dennis's.
Mhm.
So I know that Dennis changed. He had originally had rounded bars because he had, you know, tried that and then changed them to, you know, your regular bars. And probably
Yep.
for, you know, a good point. I mean, I think some of the rounded ones are fun to use in certain applications, but probably not for a real executive. So
That's right.
it's probably a good choice to change them back, even though they're pretty.
Yeah.
Because, you know, being able to obviously make those comparisons or really understanding the exact values is going to be more accurate with your regular bar
Yep.
chart.
That's right. So yeah, that's a really good point. So in every you know, in every chart, you're going to have to make some sacrifices, right? And with rounded bar charts, it can be a little misleading because the accuracy of the length is actually at the center of the dot on the end, not on the outer edge of the rounded bar chart. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're making, if you're going to change your bar charts to a different type, you know, lollipop
Right.
or those rounded bar charts, just kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah. I do like that he's stuck with like one color overall. It
Mhm.
makes it just feel really clean and like polished when you
Yep.
can. I mean, granted, sometimes we obviously have to use color for clear reasons. In this case, he didn't have to, and it's just nice that he just picked a color that doesn't have any particular intrinsic meaning. You know, nothing. It's just a
Mhm.
nice color, and that
Yep.
helps me focus on the charts and what the charts indicate.
Yep. I like it.
Yeah. And, you know, we talked earlier about having like, here's the glossary, like with those super tiny words down here, but it's out of the way, right? Like if I was curious or didn't know, I have it right here, but it's definitely faded into the background and it's not like a lot of heavy black text that I feel compelled to read.
Yeah.
It's just like there if you need to. So I think that's really useful having kind of like footers, footnotes, look here for more information.
Yeah.
The last thing, you know, I just noticed this where he has kind of the hold control with a little command to select multiple specialties. And so that's really cool because, you know, as much as we think, that's really nice, people know how to use our dashboard, the reality is as the developer, like you built it. So like, you know how to use it, you know where to click. Like if you don't tell someone to do something or make it really clear, they're not going to necessarily know. And so I actually probably wouldn't have clicked there unless I saw this. And so um, some hand holding for interactivity is necessary for
Yes.
C-suites. Like tell them hold control. Like they don't know how to click multiple things potentially. Depends how
Yep.
often they're in Tableau or whatever tool. So there's no harm in putting a little, like I tend to put subheaders under my titles that say, you know, click to filter,
Yep.
you click again to deselect, like whatever, even if it's um, just a little text to make sure they get the full functionality that you've intended for them to get. Okay, so this is Pradeep's. And so he's used a lot of things that we've talked about so far. And
Mhm.
so I'll call it a couple, but you know, here's a case where we have a really nice layout and kind of that enclosure, like each chart that goes together is, you know, boxed in by a different kind of shade. And if, and in this middle section, we saw when this, here we have 3 that are boxed in together. So while they're separate charts, which he's then added a second layer of enclosure, we have them all together. So I think the principle of enclosure is exceptionally helpful in organizing your visualization, and particularly for an executive to say, hey, these things go together, like look at these together, then look at this, like these might all be separate. And so that technique, I think, is really useful.
Yep. This is and there's a lot going on. It kind of blew up on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I like the, you know, there's the icons are really nice. They're high contrast, so you can really quickly see exactly what it is.
Mhm.
It's a very nicely laid out. Like he's got several layers of opacity going on.
Yeah.
This was the first Pareto
I,
that
yeah.
I've seen.
And I
Um,
love it. And
Yeah,
usually like
I don't know why I didn't think of the doing that.
it's great.
So really nice job to put a Pareto in there. Again, executives, again, if you, this is, I would say, this is good eye candy. I mean, you show them a Pareto. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
about the executives that you deal with, but if you show them a Pareto chart, they just like, oh, you know how to do that. And so
Yep.
they really like that kind of stuff. So yeah, this is a really, really nicely done dashboard.
Yeah, so I think kind of what you're getting at too is like using the right chart types, and so um, you know these here we have like the kind of the top 5 looks like for male, female, unknown. We have a bar chart with the simple actual numbers. I love the Pareto. I actually hadn't thought of it either, and I don't use them terribly often, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually a really good way instead of just doing like say like the top 10. Like
Right.
this helps really highlight maybe the top 10 is not what's important because it's in this case I think it's like 14, right, that make
Mm-hmm.
up 80%. So maybe really like showing the top 14 if you're ever going to do something makes the most sense because that shows the 80%. But this kind of chart then gives you all that information, but in a very meaningful way of saying like most, if we could focus on something, most of our admissions are in these top 14 specialties, and I can now see what they are.
Yep.
And if I were an executive want to say like we need to focus on one of these or whatever.
Yeah.
The
The
other
only thing I would say, like, so we've done that, and he did some shading there, but
yeah
he's applied that same shading to other parts of the dashboard. So
like
that
down
could
here.
be a little, yeah. So that could be a little confusing. So in that stacked types of admissions, your first inkling may not to be the different types of admissions, but it may
Yeah.
be a distribution between the top 14 and the others. So just kind
Yeah.
of keep that in mind.
Yeah, and this one is kind of hard to read anyway. The colors are very similar from a contrast perspective. Certainly for
Yep.
accessibility, I don't think this would pass.
No.
Obviously, he's purposely sticking with one for kind of the look and feel of it, but in a real situation, this would probably not quite fly for an exactly. Probably would, the execs I work with. Tend to be older, and I've had
Yep.
some people complain that like they can't see small words. I'm like, they're like, what point is that? I'm like, 10 point. Like that's too small. It has to be 12. I'm like, 12. 12's huge.
Yes.
So
Yes.
just be aware of who is using it and can they even see what you're looking at, unfortunately.
Yep.
But the other thing I was going to say is also the dot strip plot. One, they're like one of my favorite charts because they have such, you can do a lot of things with dot strip or jittering them or whatever. But we do use these a lot in healthcare. I mean, like this day, like this kind of thing where you can spot outliers and kind of get, even if you were to have like a box and whisker on here to kind of get here's kind of the the 50 middle percent, we use those a lot. So I like that. They're not obviously meant to get exact details on like, if I want to look at, adult mental illness, you're not gonna be able to find things as easily.
Mm-hmm.
So no, if someone's need to look for details, that's not the right chart. But for an executive, it might be really helpful to just say, hey, most of our things are on 4.5 days, and like here's the few outliers and I can see them. And most of the time weighted is under, so from a quick analysis summary, they don't need all the details. And so I think that chart works really well.
Yep. Agreed.
So yeah, it's nicely done. I mean, granted, I think in the real world, someone might not prefer this, background texture, but I think it was an interesting, attempt or trying it out. It doesn't bother me, but I know that it might. I probably wouldn't do it for an executive.
Yeah.
Just a really cool job with looking through kind of the executives, and I think the conversation was really helpful, even for me thinking through all these different concepts to consider. When you're making these dashboards, this is what we're doing like most of the time.
Yeah.
Granted, the full suite of drilling down to things, but thinking through that first dashboard is really important. That's what people are going to land on and see. So I think there's some really good tricks.
Yeah. So yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed this challenge. I enjoyed watching all the submissions come in. So thank you to the community for bringing your expertise to C-suite dashboards and Project
Yeah.
Health Biz.
Yeah, and stay tuned for February's challenge.
That's right.
All right, we'll see you all next month.